We're good. Hey,
Hey
Shiloh.
guys. Hey Ivan, how are you, buddy?
Good. How are you, man?
Doing good. Sitting out here outside on this beautiful spring day in Bend.
Looks
Uh,
beautiful out there.
yeah, tethered to this little headset, trying to make it work. But we're gonna do a live headlight restoration today. So, thanks for joining us. Thanks everybody out there for joining us for this Facebook Live. Before we get started today, just a couple quick things. Yesterday, yeah, you guys got to meet Jackson, and Jackson and I had about a 30-minute session where we discussed how to fill tight brakes, and that topic was more on the windshield repair side. Hopefully, it was really meaningful and helpful to you. So if you missed that after today's session, feel free to go back and watch that. And then today, I have the pleasure of introducing to you Ivan, who's on the interview here with us today. Ivan, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do at Glassweld?
Yeah, thank you, Shiloh. Thanks for having me. I'm a training manager here at Glassweld. So on a normal year, we would have quite a bit of people cycling through here from all over the world, all over the country, getting some hands-on training on all of our products. Usually, we spend a lot of time on windshield repair. Then we move on to scratch and headlight. We do both advanced and basic techniques. So if you're new to the game, we got you covered. And if you're advanced, you've done it for a while, we've also got some more tips and tricks for you to learn. But yeah, normal years we would have that. We're doing a lot more virtual training now with this COVID era. But hopefully we'll be able to cycle into the in-person training sometime soon in the near future.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Ivan. And we have some announcements coming on training at the end of our 2-week daily training period. So you'll hear more from Ivan and I about that next week. Ivan, you've been in the industry now for a number of years. Like, what do you enjoy most about it?
Uh, the people, hands down, and helping. I enjoy helping people with simple problems to the more complex problems. It's always fun to me. It's helping people and making sure that they are covered and they have everything that they need to get the job done right. That's where I get joy in the day.
Awesome. Awesome. And for any of you out there who have actually been to Glassweld and you've worked with Ivan, Ivan's just a really mellow, patient guy, super great trainer because he just really takes his time and gives the individualized attention that we all need sometimes. So I'm sure if you guys get a chance, beautiful place to visit, and you'll enjoy getting some hands-on training with Ivan here in the months to come. All right. So as training manager, Ivan, you talk to, as you mentioned, new and experienced techs from all over the world. And I'm sure you talk a lot about headlight restoration. Tell us about some of the things that you see that techs either struggle with or what questions come up. And we'll try to tackle those today.
Yeah, so for new techs, the biggest questions that they have are what grits should I use and when should I use them? What different types of grits should I use for what different types of headlight applications? And also how to get that Gclear coating on as streak-free as possible. Sometimes we're not using the proper amount of Gclear on there, so those are the questions that I get the most coming through here.
Great. Well, we'll do our best to try to tackle those today as we roll through a live headlight restoration. So we've got a vehicle here that we're going to work on. As you can tell, it's got a yellowed out headlight. For sake of simplicity and sort of the minimalist studio that we've got here, we're just going to do one side today. But obviously, you would just repeat these steps if you were doing that on a couple of different sides. So we can start just by talking about what to think about when you get started. I think one of the first things, right, Ivan, is like when you walk up to a headlight is figuring out what grit you're going to start with. Any thoughts on that, man?
Yeah, so what I've experienced is the more damage that there is to the headlight, the yellower, the gnarlier they look, the easier they are to get done. Those ones that are faded just slightly and they still have a lot of that OEM coating on there, those tend to take just slightly longer, but not too bad. But yeah, the ones that look the worst are usually the easiest to get done.
Exactly. So it's almost the opposite of what you would imagine. So when you see a headlight that's like this or possibly even more yellow, that means you could start at a higher grit. So as not aggressive. You just don't need as much aggressive grit to remove an already fully yellowed headlight. And so if you think about it, if the headlight is partially clear, it means that old coating is still holding on more. So you need a more aggressive sandpaper. So like in a situation like this, there's a couple of options, right? I could probably get away with about a 600 as a starting point, but it might be a little iffy if you look along the top here. There's some kind of clear areas still, and the 600 may not be able to fully take that out. So I'm probably going to opt for either a 400 or a 320 to start. And I would say, and Ivan, tell me if you concur with this. I mean, if you're new to the game of headlight restoration and you're still figuring it out, 320 is a pretty safe bet because it's going to cover 90% of headlights. If it's really yellowed out, I feel like a 320, you know, it's maybe a tad bit of overkill, but if you're working on a clearer lens, so it's a good kind of happy medium starting place. What do you think, man?
Yeah, no, that's spot on. That's what I would recommend. That's what I would use and go through those steps moving forward.
320. Okay, so we'll tackle this starting with the 320. We could probably do a 400. If you have a 400, they're very similar. But for the most part, we want to try to keep it simple for you. So we've got our Gclear tool here. It's all plugged in. We've got it plugged into the extension cord. You notice we have our applicator pad, our interface pad already on it. So I'm going to remove this whole disc because I'm not even sure what it is. But notice how I do this. I just I pull it back and then peel it off. And that looks like a 2000. So I can hang on to that one for later. And let me just grab a 320 down here somewhere if I can find them. Some 1200s. There we go. All right. Now, one of the things that we get, and one of the questions we get oftentimes, and I'll let Ivan talk about this a little bit too, is like on this first grit, which is really the biggest decision you have to make when you start, is what grits to start with. Is there's two options. Yeah, I could either do this dry or I can do it wet. And maybe I'm actually gonna tackle this one dry. Ivan, you want to talk through a little bit as I operate, maybe why those two options and what the pluses and minuses are on the first step on dry versus wet?
Yeah, perfect.
All right, and I'm gonna go ahead and let Paris, who's behind the scenes, mute me, and we'll let Ivan do a little dialogue on it and get started.
Perfect. So the reason Shiloh is going dry is to get the time down, cut down on the time that it takes to remove that top layer and dig into that lens a little bit faster. I would also do a dry if you do have just a little bit of that OEM coating on there, just to grind it down a lot quicker. There will be a lot more of those dust particles, those lens particles floating around. So the advantage, that's one of the disadvantages. One of the advantages of wet sanding is you don't have all that dry residue just floating around all over the place, and you can wet it down and just keep it together. But also, when you have something that's beat up like that lens was, if it was all yellowed out and it wasn't OEM coated, we would probably do a wet sanding. It wouldn't take that much time. It would reduce the time a little bit, but you would still get great results. Now Shiloh's applying a little bit of water, starting to sand it here.
So you can see I don't know if I'm still muted now.
Good.
But okay, so I put a little bit of water on it just to take the dust off of it. This lens is pretty much done. And just one other thing to add to what Ivan was saying, you'll get a faster cut with that first if you do it dry. So if you're really looking to speed up your efficiency, doing it dry will help with that. But do expect that your sandpapers are going to wear out more quickly. So it's sort of a trade-off. It's definitely less messy. So there's some trade-off there, obviously, and you would definitely want to try to protect yourself. I'm going to take this disc and I'm just going to hit this little corner. And the reason being is I see a little spot up here in the edge that I couldn't quite get into. So depending on the headlight you're working, you may have a little spots in certain areas where the disc just couldn't fully access. Okay.
Question for you, Shiloh.
Yeah.
How long do those grits last? How long does each sanding disc last?
That's a really good question. On the initial grit, you're probably looking at maybe 2 to 3 sets of headlights at the most. Probably, if you're doing them dry, probably 2 sets at the most. Okay. If you're doing them wet, they'll probably last a little bit longer. And the initial grit is the one that's really going to wear out more quickly. good. The initial grit is the one that's going to wear out more quickly. The secondary grits are not working nearly as hard. So like this looks pretty good. If you guys take a look at what we got here, what I'm looking for here now, and here's how I know if I can progress to the next step or not, is I've got a very uniform finish. You notice, I mean, you can kind of see the water evaporating on here, but there's no lines. There's no areas that are still shiny. There's no spots that are still yellow. It's just a nice uniform finish. I don't see any like major scuffs or anything. So I think I'm good to go. And by doing it dry, it does speed it up a little bit. But again, the disc will sort of wear out. So if you start with a 320 or even a 400, what's the next step you would always move to, Ivan, in your opinion?
I would probably go either to a 600 if I'm starting with the 300, or bump it up to 1200 if I'm working with the 600. So
exactly,
it depends on what we're starting with.
Exactly. So in this case, and if you're new to it, it's 320 and then 600. I'm going to go and do a 600. And just now when you get into the upper grits, so anything other than the first grit, because the first grit, the whole purpose is removing material, right? The secondary grits, 600, 1200, 2000, any of the secondary grits, your intent is not to remove material, it's to actually polish up some of the sheen. So you definitely want to use some water for that. You don't need much. Just spritz the disc like so, a little bit on the lens, and I'll let you guys go ahead and mute me. And then Ivan, maybe you can talk about like sort of what we're doing, what the purpose of this step is as we operate, and I'll get started.
Yeah. So Shiloh will also increase the speed on the Metabo to get that polishing action going. The first grits, we're working with a lower speed to kind of dig into that headlight with the orbital Gclear orbital sander, and then he pops up the RPM, bumps it up to about a 5 or so, to get that polishing action working on the lens, and that helps it get that sheen out. And he's going to increase it with the next grit also. He's just going to be polishing it out, working it through. It's a pretty quick process. Usually you spend your most time on your first grit. You're basically digging all that gunk off, and then on your consecutive grits, you're not ripping anything off. You're just polishing it out, and you're working that polish, and you're working that lens to kind of get it sheened up, as Shiloh said. We've got some comments here too. Bill Lambeth, hello. Nice to thank you for joining us. Dan, thank you for joining us. Hopefully headlight restoration is part of your plan soon. Henry Palacio, saludos de Oregon.
Awesome. Hey guys, glad you could join us. So just to chime in with what Ivan was saying there, with a little bit of water, we don't have to go as long. And then after you're done using the discs, you can just kind of wet them like this. That'll kind of take off the old stuff so you can keep using it on the other side and just save it for later. That looks pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and peel this off and get ready for the next step. And I'm also just going to hit this little corner here too, that same spot that was just sort of right up in there. All right, just for a second. And like Ivan said, you do go a little bit faster, but again, what we're looking for is just a nice uniformity here. All I'm looking for is that I've got a uniform finish and that it looks slightly more clear. It doesn't need to look a lot more clear, just slightly more clear. So now we're going to go ahead and choose our next grit, which here, what would we do, Ivan, in your opinion?
I would go either a 1200 or 2000, depending on what you started with, but I'm assuming you're going to go with the 1200 there.
You got it. Okay, so same deal, just a little bit of water. And again, as each step progresses, we can work less time because at this point we're just polishing up, and we keep the speed up high. You also notice too that when I stop the tool, it's just a tiny little trick. When you stop the tool and when you start it, start on the car and stop on the car. If you start out here or you stop out here, you're gonna make a mess. You can see I don't have much mess at all because I'm starting and stopping right on the headlight. All right, here we go.
Cool. Now you notice that beforehand, Shiloh taped up the outer edges of this lens, and that's to contain any of the the debris first off, and then also to keep that Metabo orbital sander from nicking any of the sides of the fender well or the hood or that plastic trim that it's got in there. It really cuts down on any of the damage or debris that occurs with headlight restoration. So just making sure you prep beforehand and having a decent layer of tape around the outside will speed up your process a lot faster. You won't have as much cleanup, and you'll be able to bust through both sets of headlights pretty quickly. So, and all of our professional kits, they come with a giant roll of tape too. So you got plenty of tape for multiple sets of headlights.
Okay, guys. So I don't know if you can hear me now, but as you notice, I'm just using a little bit of water, cleaning up the lens a little bit. You can see it's each step, it's getting a little bit shinier. Now from here, I really could actually coat, but because I want this to not just be good looking, I want it to be awesome looking. I'm going to go ahead and use the 2000 just for a quick second. And again, you really can go straight from a 1200 to a coat. But if you want that bling, that extra shininess, the 2000 just for 30 seconds or so will make a huge difference in getting that. Just pop that on there. So far so good. A little bit of water and then Ivan.
Yeah.
No, you jump ahead, man. I'm gonna go ahead and mute myself, and we'll let you guys.
Yeah, perfect. So on your first set of headlights, a lot of people, they're super concerned. Once they start digging in with the first grit and they see how hazy that headlight ends up looking, they get a little nervous and they get concerned about it. But if you work through the steps and as you go through all grits, you can see that it's starting to shine out, starting to polish out. And then with this Gclear, once Shiloh applies it, you'll see the huge transformation that it made from the original, where it was just super yellowed and hazed out, to a shiny crystal clear lens. But yeah, if you're starting this and you're doing your first few sets of headlights and you notice that it's just getting rougher and rougher with the grits that you're using, with the first grit especially, don't be concerned. Just trust the process and keep following through the steps, and you'll see that the final result will look pretty sweet. Shiloh, you're muted. Okay. There we go.
Am I back on? All right. So just a couple of quick tips. You notice when I run this, I'm not running it up on an edge. You just run it real flat. I generally put one hand back here, another hand on the front, just to keep it nice and flat. The interface pad helps with that. And then, you're not pressing down real hard, just light pressure, because you want to let the tool do the work. So just a quick tip there on how to operate. And that really applies to any of the grits, wouldn't you say, Ivan?
Yeah, that was a really good hint. That's one thing, is if you push down, you're just going to tear up the interface pad, and you're going to tear up the grit disc, the sanding disc also. It's going to tear into the...
Okay, so cool. So now we're at the stage where we have at this point, I've got enough sheen. A 2000 grit is more than sufficient. 1200 is probably fine, but a 2000 grit, I don't need to go any further. We got nice uniformity here. So now the key is, how are we going to get the coating on outside, outdoors? We've got ambient light. The sun's right behind this tree, to get it as streak free as possible. What steps are we going to follow to do that? So the first thing I'm going to do is just make sure you always want to have a bottle of isopropyl alcohol on hand. Now, ideally, put it in a spray bottle. The kit does not come with this because we can't ship it. It just not regulations don't allow us to. So put it in a spray bottle, and then you can kind of spray the lens. It'll give you a little preview, and you'll also be able to see. You also kind of want to spray even around the edges. Just make sure you don't have any. You don't want any water. You don't want any fingerprints on there. So when you come to clean this with a microfiber towel or a blue cloth, something that doesn't have any pill to it, you want to make sure your fingers don't touch the lens. Now, here's another thing that I'm probably not going to do right now, but I'll give you as a little tip. If you're working in a cold climate, let's say below 50 degrees, it's a good idea to have either a battery operated or plug-in heat gun. And if you just heat that lens for about I don't know, 15, 30 seconds and just get like a general warmth to it, it'll do two things. One, it'll evaporate any moisture that's in the air or that may have stuck to the lens, which can interact with the coating. So like if you're in like a place like Florida or something like that, that'll help with that. Let's say it's a rainy day out. So it evaporates moisture. It also helps to warm the lens, and therefore when the coating goes on, it will go on more smoothly, more evenly. So just a tip there as far as heat goes for colder climates. Ivan, you got any other tips on this as I pull out an applicator pad here on applying the coating?
No, that was a great tip, and just making sure that the lens is completely clean and that you're in a dust-free environment. A lot of times when you're outdoors and it's super windy, you'll get some particles floating into your lens. Right now, as you can see, Shallow's in a pretty mellow spot. It's not windy. It's not crazy, and he's in the shade. He's got it sitting in the shade where the sun isn't directly hitting it. That's something else that I would recommend, is to keep it in the shade and dust free.
Yeah, whenever possible. Obviously, those of you who are working out in the field, you know that you don't always have the perfect circumstances. I've seen some guys will use like an umbrella if they have to work in direct sunlight. You know, they make umbrellas for the PDR world, the paintless dent repair world, that some techs will use. So I think the biggest thing when it comes to getting a great application of Gclear on here that is going to look really solid, obviously is getting the prep work right. But to me, it's like plotting a course. Every headlight's a little bit different. At least, you know, every make and model is a little bit different. So depending on the headlight, this one's pretty straightforward. You want to plot your course. And what I mean by that is, like with this lens, what I'm looking at is I've got edges here. So I'm gonna come around the edges. I'm gonna hit all the edges first. Then I'm gonna load up some coating again, and then I'm gonna hit the face. Now, let's say this lens was bigger when I had some big bulbousy thing in the middle. I would plot the course a little bit differently. I'd be doing maybe the bulbousy portion and the edges and then loading up. So depending on the shape, generally I like to tackle any complex portions of the lens first and the edges, and then come back and hit the face. The reason you want to plot the course is because you need to move quickly, especially if you're working outside in an ambient environment like this. We do have a little bit of wind. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Is plot your course, and the more you get used to doing this, it's going to get easier. Your mind will just sort of automatically go there. But at first, that's an important thing to do. So what I'm going to do is I've got this applicator here. I've got a brand new applicator. Another thing I would avoid is reusing applicators more than a few times, because that will just lead to more streaks. Make sure you shake it up your bottle. You know, if it sits around for a couple weeks, the chemicals just get mixed up, and we want a good, long-lasting, several year repair here. So make sure it's good and shook up. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and apply coating right on the edge here. And if anything, you want to err on the side of having too much coating, not too little. If you have too little, you're going to end up with streaks and like a thin spots. And that's why I'm going to actually reload. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a bead of coating down here, hit the edges really quickly, and then I'm coming back and put another bead right in the same spot. And then I'm going to hit the face. And I want you to notice how much I use here. I'm going to move the bar stool out of the way here. All right. I may even kind of crouch down here. So load up. And I'm putting a pretty generous amount on. And then I'm going to come right through the edges. I'm not putting much pressure at all. And then I'm going to reload. Oops. Get the little reload again. And then I'm going to come right across the front. All right, now just kind of let it, if you see any spots up in the edges or whatever, you can try to tackle those. Now, if I've got enough coating on there and I'm in a decent amount of shade, if I do have a little streak, usually it'll just self-level out. Looks pretty good. I see one little spot up there in the corner.
So, Shiloh, what happens if you don't get a solid application in the first round?
Great question. So I've got my alcohol right here. This one looks like it's going to level out just fine. But let's say I biffed it on the first one. I have my alcohol right here. I just spray it real quick and then come right back with a paper towel, one of those blue paper towels, and you can strip it right off. If you see lots of streaks, if you see just a little bit of streaks and you put enough material, it'll usually self-level out. But if you don't give it enough material, it can't self-level out. And that's where a lot of new technicians make the mistake of using too little material, or sometimes pressing too hard too. Like if you're pressing too hard, you're thinking that that's somehow going to help, but really the coating Doesn't work that way. So you almost need to load it up and then do it light. Again, plot the course, load up, do the edges, do the complicated spots, load up again real quick as fast as you can, and then lightly, kind of in a continuous motion. So this one looks pretty good.
Sweet. Yeah, it looks
I'd
great.
say it's about a 90%. Came
solid.
out really solid looking. So we're gonna go ahead and just grab our UV light here. Oops. Push this over here and plug it in.
Now, how long does this application last on the lens?
Okay, turn that on, and we're gonna get this as close as we can. Yeah, so every climate's gonna be different, and based on how the car is stored, that also will affect it too. But in most cases, you're gonna have at least a couple of years out of a proper application. Now it's going to be different. If you're in the Pacific Northwest in a cloudy climate, it can last more than that. And if you're in a hardcore place like New Mexico at 7,000 feet and there's just blazing sun all the time and the car is parked out in the sun, it may be less than that. So it's going to depend on the storage of the vehicle and the climate that you're in. So we notice we set up our curing light here. Ivan, I mean, in your opinion, do you need to fully cure it before you were to pull it out in the sun on a day like today?
As long as it's not super tacky, as long as it's just hard enough that it's not wet and it's not gonna streak anywhere and bugs aren't gonna get stuck in there. But yeah, I would just pull it into the sunlight and finish up whatever else you're doing.
Yeah, cool. So I just kind of let it sit here for about a minute or so, and then I'm gonna move it down a little bit, and I'm gonna tighten it up here and give it another minute sort of from the bottom, and then we'll pull it out. You'll notice too that I didn't pull the tape off yet. I'll wait to pull the tape off until it's at least dry to the touch. And to Ivan's point, you don't need it to be rock solid as far as the curing goes. With this particular product, it'll continue to cure for about 24 hours. So you wouldn't want to drive it through a car wash on the first day. Take it outside as long as it's not raining. Let it just continue to cure in ambient light, and it'll fully harden up within a day, and then you can treat it like normal. And this one's probably already looking pretty good. Just it doesn't feel tacky. We'll let it sit for another minute or so. I'm trying to think if there's any other tips that you can think of, Ivan, as far as getting a good cure or avoiding that cloudy appearance that you might get in humidity. Anything else come to mind that we haven't touched on?
Yeah, well, I have a couple questions about that on the chat, if you wouldn't mind going through them.
Yeah, let's do it while we're doing this.
Yeah, so first question is, will the tape peel off the paint? The tape on the outside?
That's a good question. As long as you're using the right tape, no. You want to use like a body shop type painter's tape, and that's what it's designed for. Yeah, if you use just regular masking tape or something like that, you could have that issue. So just make sure you use yeah, exactly. You've got tape that's made for that. What was the other question?
So a Facebook user, I can't see the name here, but I have the biggest trouble keeping them from being cloudy here in the southeast with our humidity.
Yeah. So again, I go back to two things. Make sure that you're heating each lens before you start, because that is an interaction of humidity, typically on the lens, not necessarily in the bottle. And it could also be, making sure that you're really, really drying it out well with alcohol too. Alcohol wipes can be a little bit spotty in getting all the moisture. Any other tips from your end, Ivan, on that point?
No, if you have access to that denatured alcohol, it seems to wipe away all that moisture with a few wipes on the lens.
I think isopropyl is the most recommended one, and that there's a couple of different grades of that, and it's just like regular hardware store isopropyl alcohol.
Yeah, exactly. Got another question: is the Gclear adhesion better at 1200 than 2000 grit?
As far as adhesion goes, yeah, probably a little bit better, but over all the years we've been selling this product, I've never heard of really any adhesion issues that I can recall where it's like peeled off or anything. So I think you'd be fine at 2,000 or 1,200. As you could see at 2,000, we still had a fair amount of grip to the surface. But I think any time you apply to a more aggressive surface, it's probably going to adhere a little bit better.
Yeah, it's just not going to have that sheen at the end.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right.
Anything else?
I do have a couple more if you have time.
Yeah, I think so. I'll go ahead and pull this off here so you guys can see what our finished result looks like while we talk, and then we'll wrap it up. It looks pretty good. I'm pretty happy with it.
Looks solid. So can you dry the Gclear with a heat gun in colder weather after application?
Can you dry the Gclear with a heat gun
in cold weather
after the application?
Yeah.
You can, but I don't know that it will do a lot to help at that point. It might help with the self-leveling a little bit, especially if you're working indoors. But it starts to set up pretty quickly, even with some ambient UV. So the best bet is to, really the two things. The other thing you can do is just make sure that your Gclear bottle itself is relatively warm. It's not sitting in your truck overnight at 20 degrees, because as the coating coagulates and then you combine that with really cold weather or a really cold surface, it's not the greatest combination. So if you can heat the lens and keep the bottle at like an ambient temperature, you're going to be a lot better off.
Yep. And then just a comment here from David Cortez. He says he has a Headlight going on 3 years now on his work truck, and it was his first test subject for Gclear. So that's pretty sweet to hear.
Awesome. That's awesome. And if I recall, David is in one of those hardcore places I was referring to in New Mexico that has, the kind of combination of sun and altitude or elevation as well. So awesome.
Cool.
I can't think of much else. Anything else on your end, Ivan, as far as tips or tricks?
No, I think
at this point we would go ahead and remove the tape.
Yeah. Yep. Get it cleaned up and back to the owner.
Awesome. Yeah. So, just to want to thank everybody for tuning in. Thank you to Ivan for all the great questions and the tips that he provided today. Hope you guys all get to meet him pretty soon, and you guys can come visit us here in Bend before too long. And then tune in tomorrow too. We're going to have a really great session on understanding how to bill through insurance for windshield repair. And Olivia Howell and one of our other people here is going to be hosting that course tomorrow at the same time at 3 p.m. So you won't want to miss that. Thanks everybody for joining in. Thank you, Ivan, and thank you to my cameraman.
Okay. Yep. Got the setup there. Thank you. Right. Thank you, everybody.